This 5-color deck is an Enchantments Matter build with paths to victory that include life drain, direct damage, combat and/or commander damage. The 99 is inundated with dozens of enchantment spells, including numerous gods from Theros as well as the entire cycle of shrines. These particular enchantments are legendary, which allows us to activate Sisay's ability to search our library and put them onto the battlefield, as long as her power is greater than or equal to the card's converted mana cost. Additionally, there are other spells and abilities that will let us search our libraries to put enchantments onto the battlefield or into our hand. The static abilities of these enchantments will gain us advantages throughout the game while conserving our resources for the purposes of advancing our game plan as well as interacting with our opponent's board states.
Welcome to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. Sisay, Weatherlight Captain is a 2/2 legendary human soldier for 2 and 1 white mana. Sisay gets +1/+1 for each color among other legendary permanents we control. We may pay Wooburg mana and search our library for a legendary permanent card with converted mana cost less than Sisay's power and put that card onto the battlefield. This is an Enchantments Matter deck, and we plan to utilize Sisay's ability to get as many shrines out onto the battlefield as possible and utilize their effects to win the game. As we mentioned during the introduction, for Sisay, Weatherlight Captain, the general of this Enchantments Matter deck, we are going to utilize her ability to get every shrine we can possibly get from our library into play and win the game via their effects. With that being said, these are all of the 17 shrines that are in Magic's history that are being included in this Enchantments Matter build. We're going to begin with the original cycle of shrines from Kamigawa. Honden of Cleansing Fire will allow us to gain 2 life for each shrine we control at the beginning of our upkeep. Next, we have Honden of Seeing Winds, again from the original Kamigawa block. At the beginning of our upkeep, we will draw a card for each shrine we control. Staying in color order, we're going to go with Honden of Night's Reach. At the beginning of our upkeep, target opponent will discard a card for each shrine we control. Honden of Infinite Rage. At the beginning of our upkeep, Honden of Infinite Rage will deal damage to target creature or player equal to the number of shrines we control. And lastly, from the original cycle of Kamigawa Shrines, we have Honden of Life's Web. At the beginning of our upkeep, we may put a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token into play for each shrine we control. So the first 5 shrines are some of the most powerful ones of all of the shrines in Magic's history. And next we're going to move to the Core Set 2021 shrines. Again, we have a full cycle, white through green, and then a 5-color shrine as well. We begin with Sanctum of Tranquil Light. These shrines give us some additional abilities that other shrines did not in the past. And this is, we can pay 5 and a white mana to tap target creature. The ability of this shrine costs 1 less to activate for each shrine we control. So optimally, we will just pay 1 white mana to tap down a creature. Next is Sanctum of Calm Waters. At the beginning of our pre-combat main phase, we may draw X cards where X is the number of shrines we control. If we do, then we discard a card. Sanctum of Stone Fangs. At the beginning of our pre-combat main phase, each opponent loses X life and we gain X life, where X is the number of shrines we control. Sanctum of Shattered Heights. We pay 1 generic mana and discard a land card or a shrine card, and have Sanctum of Shattered Heights deal X damage to target creature or planeswalker, where X is the number of shrines we control. Sanctum of Fruitful Harvest. At the beginning of our pre-combat main phase, we can add X mana of any one color where X is the number of shrines we control. And the last shrine from the core 2021 block is Sanctum of All. It's a 5-color shrine, so we don't necessarily have to pay Wooburg for that, because we could just pay Wooburg for Sisay if her power is greater than Sanctum of All's mana value. And what this sanctum does, this is the granddaddy of all the sanctums. At the beginning of our upkeep, we may search our library and or graveyard for a shrine card and put it onto the battlefield. If we search our library this way, of course, we shuffle it. If an ability of another shrine we control triggers while we control 6 or more shrines, that ability will trigger an additional time. Sanctum of All is one of our ultimate win cards, and as you can imagine, if we have the minimum requirement of having 6 or more shrines, if we just look at some of the shrines we've already talked about here and having them trigger an additional time, how about Sanctum of Fangs, Sanctum of Stone Fangs, the mass life drain shrine? Or what about drawing the additional cards or gaining the additional life? Or how about the damage that Honden of Infinite Rage, the original Kamigawa shrines here paired with Sanctum of All? It's going to be lights out for the table unless there's some way in which that our opponents can interact with us. And lastly, we have 6 more shrines, and as you've noticed, from the original Kamigawa shrines to the core 2021 shrines, each of the original Kamigawa shrines were at the beginning of our upkeep triggers. Then, as we moved to the core 2021 shrines, there was a little bit more of, how do we want to say, a little bit of variety. We had some abilities on the white one and the red one that allowed us to utilize its effect at any time during the game, while 3 of the other 5 monocolor shrines were at the beginning of our pre-combat main phase. And then lastly, of course, Sanctum of All allowed us to fall back to what the original Kamigawa shrines did by triggering at the beginning of our upkeep. Now, for the latest cycle of shrines from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, they're not just enchantments, but they're also enchantment creatures. And each of these creatures are going to have an ability similar to the shrines we've seen here, but they are all going to trigger, almost all of them, the 5 monocolor ones will. They're going to trigger at the beginning of our end step. So that's going to be, for the white one, we have go-shintai of Shared Purpose. For the creature part of this, it's a 1/3 with Vigilance. For the part that really matters, the shrine part, at the beginning of our end step, we may pay 1 mana. And if we do, we can create a 1/1 colorless shrine creature token for each shrine we control. Again, this is one of those abilities that is going to cost us a generic mana to utilize at the beginning of our end step, but it's going to be worth it, particularly if we have a number of shrines in play. And as you can see from our introduction of the earlier shrines already, this shrine is very similar to Honden of Life's Web. Was it Life's Web? I think it was Life's Web. All right, there's a lot of shrines to remember. We got 17 of them now. So the new white one is a nice take on the classic green one. Next shrine, we have a blue one, go-shintai of Lost Wisdom. It's a 0/4 flyer, and then we can pay that 1 generic mana at the beginning of our end step. And if we do, target player mills X cards, where X is the number of shrines we control. This is not a dedicated mill build in any way, so this ability is a little lackluster in a deck like this. So minimally, the inclusion of go-shintai of Lost Wisdom is more for what it is than what it does. It's being included because it is a shrine, not so much for what it does. Next, we have go-shintai of Hidden Cruelty. 2/2 death touches the creature part, and then for its shrine ability, we can pay that 1 generic mana, and if we do, we can destroy target creature with toughness X or less. X is the number of shrines we control. This may be the most powerful of the monocolor shrine cycle here from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, because never before in any of the previous shrines that we've already reviewed were we able to target a creature for destruction. And as long as we have enough shrines, we should be able to take out any creature on the battlefield aside from any potential protection. The red shrine from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty is Go-Shintai of Ancient Wars. It's a 2/2 first strike for the creature part. The shrine part reads, we pay 1 generic mana at the beginning of our end step, and if we do, we'll deal X damage to target player or planeswalker, where X is the number of shrines we control. So as we went through the evolution, or should I say the de-evolution of the red shrines, we went from the Honden of Infinite Rage, which dealt the damage to any target, because that reads to target creature or player, and back then it was just going to be target creature, player, or planeswalker, of course, as it was further eroded. Then we went to having to discard it to just have a more selective amount of more selective targets where that damage was going, and here we're hampered a little bit more because now we can't take care of any creatures from the battlefield. However, we could consider this red shrine from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty to be a potential win condition because we can deal direct damage right to the face of an opponent. And that is something that we should not overlook, particularly because the deck is jam-packed with 17 different shrines. So we could have the ability to do a nice amount of damage with each activation. All right, and we have Go-Shintai of Boundless Vigor. It's a 1/1 trampler. That's the creature part. The shrine part will be we pay one generic mana, and if we do, we'll put a +1/+1 counter on target shrine for each shrine we control. So, as we stated earlier, these 5 new shrines from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty are all enchantment creature shrines, which means they could be good targets to put the +1/+1 counters on from Go-Shintai of Boundless Vigor. What we do not have included in the deck are any ways to make our other shrines creatures. We're not playing that type of build. So at this moment right now, if Go-Shintai of Boundless Vigor is in play, most likely it itself will be the recipient of those +1/+1 counters. All right, so those are 16 of the first 16 of the 17 shrines, all of them included in the deck, and we've saved the biggest one for last. We have Go-Shintai of Life's Origin. Here we have a 3/4 enchantment creature shrine again. We can pay WUBRG ability and tap the Life's Origin to return target enchantment card from our graveyard to the battlefield. A nice recursive ability, but we invest 5 mana to do so. We tap the creature, and we need an enchantment to be in our graveyard. Whenever Go-Shintai of Life's Origin or another non-token shrine enters the battlefield under our control, we create a 1/1 colorless shrine enchantment creature token. These shrine enchantment creature tokens are just going to help make the impact of their triggered abilities or activated abilities of our shrines even more powerful, because every time a shrine enters the battlefield under our control, we're going to put an additional shrine creature into play. So although we're playing with 17 shrines in the deck, we have the ability to make so many more with the presence of Go-Shintai of Life's Origin on the battlefield. Which begs the question, why is Go-Shintai of Life's Origin in the 99 and not in the command zone? Well, let's break it down real quick just so that we can get that conversation out of the way. Let's pair up the 2 creatures that we have. I maintain that Sisay, Weatherlight Captain, is the better commander for a Shrines Matter deck, and these are the reasons why. We can tutor any shrine from our library by utilizing Sisay's WUBRG ability, as long as we have her power and toughness a little bit bigger. As long as her power is a little bit bigger than 2/2. And that shouldn't be a problem because we have so many legendary permanents in this deck that are going to help make her power get bigger. And plus a couple of added features as well, an aura, a couple of artifacts for equipment. It's not going to be difficult to boost up Sisay's power in order to grab any shrine from our library. We really only need to get to a 6 total power to get any one of the shrines that we want. Additionally, for Sisay, the targets in the library will outnumber the targets in the graveyard. We're playing with 17 different shrines in the deck. If Go-Shintai is in our command zone, we only have what's in our graveyard as a way in which to get shrines from the graveyard onto the battlefield. Additionally, by activating Sisay's ability, the WUBRG ability, we do not have to tap Sisay. We have to tap Go-Shintai of Life's Origin as a way in which to activate its ability, and again, the targets could be limited from the graveyard. With Sisay, we can activate her Wooburg ability as many times each turn. We never have to tap her, and we have many ways to accelerate the mana to make sure that we can activate Sisay's ability more than once each turn. And when those shrines are entering the battlefield straight from the library, it could end up triggering Go-Shintai as well. It wouldn't be difficult for Sisay, Weatherlight Captain, to tutor out Go-Shintai of Life's Origin very early in a game. Additionally, with the enter the battlefield trigger that Go-Shintai has, I think that's better to be left in the library. We have more ways in which to get it out of the library and onto the battlefield, or out of our graveyard and onto the battlefield as well. We have numerous recursive spells that we have yet to present in this deck tech. So for all of those reasons, I maintain that Sisay, Weatherlight Captain, is the better and more powerful general for a Shrines Matter deck. Go-Shintai, in my opinion, is better in the 99 with Sisay in the command zone. The following group of cards is going to be considered our miscellaneous spells. The bulk majority of these cards are going to be Enchantments Matter cards. So let's begin with our very first spell. That's going to be Enlightened Tutor. We'll pay 1 white mana at instant speed. We'll search our library for an enchantment or perhaps an artifact, reveal it, shuffle our library, and put that card right on top of it. This can help us to get any one of the much needed or much powerful shrines or other enchantments from our library right on top of the library itself. Next up, we have Helm of the Gods. As we spoke earlier, we have numerous ways to buff Sisay's power as a way in which to tutor out any enchantment from the library. This will give Sisay +1/+1 for each enchantment we control. It only costs 1 to cast and 1 to equip, and this is a loaded enchantment deck. Another way in which we can buff Sisay's ability is All That Glitters. Yes, it is an aura. Yes, there is the potential of getting 2 for 1. However, we have many ways to recur enchantments from our graveyard, so including this very powerful enchantment should come as no stress at all, because like I said, even if it gets 2 for 1 with Sisay, we got lots of ways to bring it back. And when we can successfully put this onto Sisay, she's going to get +1/+1 for each artifact and enchantment we control. We buff her power past 5. Anything past 5 allows us to get any one of the shrines that are in our library. Next, we have Weaver of Harmony. He's an enchantment creature. It's 2/2 for 1 and a green. It will give other enchantment creatures we control +1/+1. In addition to the enchantment shrine creature tokens that Go-Shintai of Life's Origin can create, there are a number of other enchantment creatures here that could be benefit from this power and toughness boost. That's not the primary reason why Weaver of Harmony is included in the 99. We can pay a green and tap it, and we can copy target activated or triggered ability we control from an enchantment source. What that means for the purposes of this deck is pay a green mana, tap Weaver of Harmony, copy activated or triggered ability from a shrine we control. Next up, and another enchantment creature, we have a Sithis Harvest's Hand. It's a 1/2 for Selesnya colors. Whenever we cast an enchantment spell, we gain 1 life and we draw a card. In this deck, we have so many ways to get enchantments onto the battlefield without having to cast them. We have direct graveyard to battlefield recursion, and of course with Sisay's ability, we have the direct tutor from the library into play. However, there will be some times that we're hard casting some of the enchantments that we have in our hand. Having Sithis on the battlefield to allow us to gain peripheral life and replace the spell that we're casting, as long as it's an enchantment, seems like it's too valuable to not include as one of the creatures in this deck. Next card we have is Sterling Grove. It's Selesnya colors. It's an enchantment. All other enchantments we control have Shroud. We can pay 1 mana to sacrifice Sterling Grove, and then we can search our library for an enchantment card, reveal it, shuffle our library, and put that card on top of it. So this will allow us to have protection from all of our opponent's spot removal spells as long as we have Sterling Grove in play. However, be cautious, because this will also give our enchantments Shroud as well, meaning we will not be able to target them with any effects. So if we have any of our go-shintai shrines in play, or any of our enchantment creatures, and we go to put all that glitters on one of them, or we try to equip Helm of the Gods, that will not work because of the Shroud. So be careful. Make sure you know what you're doing with the battlefield synergies when you decide to cast Sterling Grove. And if you get Sterling Grove in play, why not follow it up with a copy of Greater Oromancy? An enchantment for 1 and a white. Other enchantments we control have Shroud, and enchanted creatures we control have Shroud. So this, in conjunction with Sterling Grove, will make every one of our enchantments have Shroud. This will have Shroud because of Sterling Grove, and Sterling Grove will have Shroud because of Greater Oromancy. So for any combination of opponent's spot removal spells that are trying to target any of our enchantments, they will fizzle immediately between the synergy of those two cards. Another enchantment creature, we have Destiny Spinner. It's a 2/3 for 1 and a green. Creature and enchantment spells we control can't be countered. Let's make sure we protect our enchantments every single possible way we can. Let's give them protection from counter magic. We can pay 3 and a green, and target land we control becomes an XX elemental creature with trample and haste until end of turn, where X is the number of enchantments we control, and it's still a land. Notice that we do not have to tap Destiny Spinner in order to activate that ability. In an enchantment-focused deck with cards yet to be previewed like Sarah's Sanctum and Sanctum Weaver, we are going to be able to utilize Destiny Spinner's activated ability as a potential win condition. Next card up, we have Champion's Helm. It is an equipment. It has nothing to do with artifacts. It has nothing to do with enchantments. This is going to make sure that we can protect Sisay, giving her +2/+2, and giving her hexproof. We want to make sure that when Sisay's in play, we can try to keep her in play for as long as we can, as well as buffing up that power so that we can get any enchantment from our library right onto the battlefield. Next spell we have is Idyllic Tutor. This is going to be our enchantment specific demonic tutor. 2 and a white, we're going to cast this, search our library for an enchantment. We're going to reveal it, of course, because this is white, and then we're going to put it directly into our hand. Next spell we have is Paradox Haze. This is going to help us to double all. Well, I can't really say all anymore, because now some of our shrines do not necessarily trigger during our upkeep, but the majority of the most powerful ones will feel the benefits of having Paradox Haze on the battlefield and under our control. It will give us an additional upkeep. After our first upkeep, we get an additional upkeep. So the original shrines will trigger, and that's just going to make them even more powerful. In addition to Sanctum of All, if we can pair Paradox Haze with Sanctum of All, and then fetch out 2 different shrines at the beginning of our upkeep, and then do it again if we have 6 more, that could be 4 total, thinking that the glass is completely full here. Next spell, we have Thassa, God of the Sea. This is the first god that we've included. Prior to the release of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty and all of the new cycle of shrines, this was more of a dedicated god deck than it was a shrine deck. However, when the 6 new shrines from Neon Dynasty came out, that gave us a total of 17, so it felt like we could really shift the focus away from the gods to have more of a shrine focus. Thassa, God of the Sea, was one of the gods that made the cut. Her ability to scry at the beginning of our upkeep, plus her ability to give a creature we control unblockability for a turn by paying 1 and a blue mana. If we're able to utilize that on Sisay, particularly when looking at cards like Helm of the Gods and all that glitters, we have the potential to strike for lethal commander damage. Next, we have Citizen Champion. It's a 1/3 for 2 and a green. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under our control, we put a +1/+1 counter on this dude, and then we can draw. We put a +1/+1 counter on this woman, on this human warrior. Is it a woman? I can't tell. Let's just say it's Citizen Champion. I can't tell. All right, so Citizen Champion, 1/3 for 2 and a green, and it has the Constellation mechanic. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under our control, we'll put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. Why this is so much more valuable is that, like I said earlier during this deck tech, we have so many ways to get enchantments into play from our library because of Sisay, from our library because of Sanctum of All, and then from our graveyard with all of our different recursive abilities, that we're not casting as many enchantments as we are getting them into play. So any kind of effect that will trigger because of an enchantment enters the battlefield as opposed to it being cast is much more valuable in this type of build, and that's why Citizen Champion, which is not an enchantment creature, but it has such great synergies with enchantments coming into play, is included in the 99. Next, we have Hannah, Ship's Navigator, 1/2 for 1 in Azorius colors, and it is a legendary permanent, which means it could be tutored up by Sisay without any additional power boosts. And when she is in play, we can pay 1 in Azorius colors to return target artifact or enchantment card from our graveyard to our hand. So this is a way in which to recur those fallen shrines or enchantment creatures and get them back into our hand. Another one of the gods that made the cut when the Shintai cycle of shrines entered into the 99 is Klothys, God of Destiny, 4/5 indestructible, of course, for 1 in Gruul colors. At the beginning of our pre-combat main phase, we will exile target card from a graveyard, and if it was a land card, we get to add red or green mana. Otherwise, we gain 2 life, and Klothys deals 2 damage to each opponent. Klothys was favored to remain in the 99 after the transition to a shrine focus because of its ability to interact with our opponent's graveyards, plus it has the ability to spread some damage to every opponent every time we take a turn. Next spell, we've got Gen, Arcanum Weaver, another legendary creature, 2/3 for Mardu colors. We can pay Mardu, tap, and sacrifice an enchantment to return target enchantment card from our graveyard to the battlefield. Those 1/1 colorless shrine enchantment creature tokens created by go-shintai of Life's Origin make for great sacrifice fodder for Gen, Arcanum Weaver when we're trying to get back one of our true shrines from the graveyard. The third god that made the cut from the original build of this deck is Heliod, God of the Sun. 5/6 for 3 and a white. Other creatures we control have vigilance, which is not that big of a deal because, again, we shifted away from the god attack approach. However, its activated ability of 2 and 2 white to create a 2/1 white cleric enchantment creature token, that's just uber valuable, particularly in a deck that, like we said earlier, is an enchantments matter deck and does have Serum Serra Sanctum in the 99. Next god to make the list was Purphoros, God of the Forge, 6/5 for 3 and a red. Whenever another creature enters a battlefield under our control, Purphoros will deal 2 damage to each opponent. This is similar to what Klothys could do. We were trying to focus on gods that would have an effect on all of our opponents while we're sitting at the table. Purphoros will do this. We do have some creatures that will come into play and trigger Purphoros's 2 points of damage across all of our opponents. And additionally, the 2 and a red mana that can give creatures we control +1/+0 till end of turn, that may not come into too much play, particularly in a deck that's focused on winning primarily through the triggered and activated abilities of our shrines. However, you never can tell in a game of Commander whether or not creature power boosts may come in handy. So similar to Klothys, Purphoros was kept in the 99 because it interacts with every one of our opponents. Same can be said about the next god to make the list, and that was Mogis, God of Slaughter. 7/5 for 2 in Rakdos colors. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, Mogis will deal 2 damage to that player unless they sacrifice a creature. Now, this isn't really going to have too much of an effect if we're playing against someone that's playing a token deck or aristocrats. If anything, that might actually help the opponent. Well, you gotta just survey the battlefield and see whether or not it would be worth getting Mogis out there into play. Its sacrifice ability could come into play, particularly when you look at some of the other gods we've included. Klothys is going to deal 2 points each turn. Perforos is going to deal 2 points each time we get a creature to enter the battlefield. Mogis dealing 2 points each round of turns. All of these little 2 points, these shocks, are chipping away at our opponent's life total, and that's before we even start activating or triggering any of the effects from our shrines. Next, we have Archon of Sun's Grace, 3/4 Archon with flying and lifelink for 2 and double white mana. Pegasus creatures we control have lifelink, and this also has the constellation ability similar to Citizen Champion. Whenever an enchantment enters a battlefield under our control, we will create a 2/2 white Pegasus creature token with flying. So again, the constellation mechanic is so much more powerful here than the cast triggers, because like I've said multiple times already, we have a lot of ways to get enchantments onto the battlefield, not by casting them. So having cards like Archons of Sun Grace and Citizen Champion will reward us for those efforts. Just like the next card, Eidolon of Blossoms, a 2/2 enchantment creature for 2 and double green, again with the constellation mechanic. Whenever it or another enchantment ETBs under our control, we're going to draw a card. So this is a little bit more pricey from a mana value standpoint than Citizen Champion, and it also doesn't dole out any +1/+1 counters. However, for 1 additional green mana, we will take the effect that it gives us by allowing us to draw a card. Another one we have here for getting some enchantments out of the library and onto the battlefield is Zur the Enchanter, a 1/4 flyer for 1 in Esper colors. Whenever he attacks, we search our library for an enchantment card with a CMC 3 or less and put it onto the battlefield. That's just going to get out so many of our shrines. We don't even have to worry about any kind of power checks with Sisay. All we have to do is turn Zur the Enchanter sideways. We don't even have to deal the combat damage. It's an attack trigger. 4 is a pretty good toughness too, so even if some of our opponents may have a chump blocker that can, block a flying creature, Zur could still survive that combat. And even better for us as a bonus, if our opponents don't have any ways to block flying creatures, then we know that Zur will survive and be able to tutor out some additional enchantments. All right, next we have Calyx, Destiny's Hand. It's a Planeswalker, our first and only Planeswalker included in the 99 of this deck. Comes into play with 4 loyalty counters for 2 in Selesnya colors. We can +1 to look at the top 4 cards of our library. We may reveal an enchantment card from among them and put it into our hand. The rest of the cards are then put on the bottom of our library in a random order. So we can dig through the top 4 to find an enchantment. It seems very unlikely that we would whiff +1ing Calyx, Destiny's Hand, because of the number of enchantments that are included in this deck. We can -3, we can take off 3 loyalty counters to exile target creature or enchantment we don't control until target enchantment we control leaves the battlefield. This has a lot of really good synergy with the gods that we've included in this deck, because they also are enchantments. They also have indestructible, and unless their devotion is turned on, they're just going to be indestructible enchantments sitting out on the battlefield. Those are extraordinarily difficult to deal with. So if we utilize Calyx's -3 to exile a creature or enchantment, and then that stays exiled until, say, Klothys is gone and his devotion to Gruul is, or his devotion to Gruul colors is 7, it seems likely that that enchantment or creature will be staying gone for quite some time. And then lastly, Calyx's Big Bang reads for 7 loyalty counters. We can return all enchantment cards from our graveyard to the battlefield. So again, more synergy with the enchantments that we have in the deck, and another way in which to recur them if we can get to Calyx's Big Bang ability. right, next up we have Sphere of Safety. It's an enchantment for 4 and a white. Creatures cannot attack us or a planeswalker we control unless they pay X for each of those creatures, where X is the number of enchantments we control. Without any opponent interaction, leaving Sphere of Safety on the battlefield, that is just going to be lights out. The door is going to be shut on each one of their combats. The next spell we're going to talk about, this one is tricky. You gotta know from the way the game is going, you gotta know what the opponents are doing, where their resources are, whether or not this is a good choice. If it hits, you are going to win the game. It's only a matter of time. If for some reason it doesn't, well, you're going to be watching for quite some time until the game is over. And that spell is Enduring Ideal. It's a sorcery for 5 and double white. We search our library for an enchantment card and put it into play. Then we shuffle our library. This has the epic mechanic. For anyone who's unfamiliar with the epic mechanic from the original Kamigawa set, that means that for the rest of the game, we cannot play spells. At the beginning of each of our upkeeps, we'll copy Enduring Ideal except for its epic ability. So at the beginning of our upkeep, after we cast this, we will search our library for an enchantment card and put it into play. Hopefully they will be our shrines, because those are the primary ways in which we're going to win. However, the part about not casting any spells for the rest of the game, that's not going to go away. So if for some reason somebody goes through our library and takes out all of our best enchantments, we could be spinning our wheels until the game is over. So I would suggest making sure that we have a bunch of our other cards on the battlefield that can help us to do other things that aren't exactly casting spells. Like Sisay, Weatherlight Captain, activating her ability is not casting a spell. Same thing with go-shintai of Life's Origin. Same thing with Gen Arcanum Weaver. These are ways in which that we can kind of skirt around the lack of casting spells because of Enduring Ideal's epic mechanic, but we can still utilize our mana to activate our abilities. Again, it's one of those cards that you just got to have a feel and you got to hope it hits. All right, 3 more spells left in this subsection of the video. The next is Nyxbloom Ancient. It is an enchantment creature, 5/5 trample for 4 and triple green. If we tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times as much of that mana instead. This has a direct synergy with Sisay as I lower Nyxbloom Ancient a little bit. So if we were to pay Wooburg colors first to activate Sisay's ability, and we have Nyxbloom Ancient on the battlefield under our control, we won't search our library for one of those legendary permanents. We will search our library for 3 of them. And Nyxbloom Ancient will triple our mana. Can you imagine Nyxbloom Ancient and a fully loaded Serra Sanctum? Oh, baby, I would like to live in a world where I get that every single game. Second to last spell on this portion of the deck tech, we have Eerie Ultimatum. We're going to pay 2 white, 3 black, and 2 green at sorcery speed to return any number of permanent cards with different names from our graveyard to the battlefield. This is EDH, and this is not one of the Shadowborn Apostles or Rat Colony, Persistent Petitioners, or Relentless Rat decks. This is just a straight singleton EDH deck. So what this really should read for the purposes of our build is return each permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield. We can consider Eerie Ultimatum based upon what's in our graveyard, of course. We can consider Eerie Ultimatum as one of our potential win conditions. And our last spell of this subsection of the video, it is Dance of the Manse. Sorcery speed for X and Azorius colors. Return up to X target artifact and or non-aura enchantment cards with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If X is 6 or more, those permanents are 4/4 creatures in addition to their other types. That's where it gets a little tricky for me. The purposes of having the shrines as enchantments make them a little more difficult to deal with because players are more prone to worry about creature removal than they are for enchantment removal. Plus, we have the benefit that all of our shrines are 5 CMC or less. So if for some reason we have numerous shrines out in our graveyard, we can just pay the 5 for X, get the 5 best ones, have them return to the battlefield as non-creatures, making them a little more difficult to handle. Adding anything more than the 5 turns them into creatures and just gives our opponents an additional way in which to interact with them. For me, I would just keep them as enchantments, but that's just my choice. The following cards are our removal and disruption spells, and we had a specific theme in mind when choosing these spells. We wanted spells that were very versatile, that allowed us to target any permanent or multiple permanent types. So we really shied away from destroy target creature or exile target creature, more along the lines of, let's just say, a Beast Within. Beast Within is an instant speed of removal spell, of course, 2 and a green. We destroy target permanent. So this allows us to deal with a pesky artifact or a creature or even a planeswalker or maybe even a land. We gift its controller with a 3/3 green beast creature token, but this is Commander, and we will most likely come out on the winning end of the exchange of a troublesome permanent for a 3/3 green beast creature token. So good is Beast Within, they created a second version of it, and that's Generous Gift. It's going to do the exact same thing that Beast Within does, just for 2 and a white, and it leaves behind a 3/3 green elephant creature token instead. Next up, for enchantment as removal, we have Oblivion Ring. When it ETBs, we exile another target non-land permanent. When Oblivion Ring leaves the battlefield, return the exile card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So this does not destroy the permanent like Beast Within or Generous Gift. This kind of hangs it out there in limbo, daring its controller to eventually try to remove Oblivion Ring. And this is being included under the understanding that players tend to put more creature removal in their decks than they do enchantment removal, so something like Oblivion Ring could really have some staying power. If Oblivion Ring is that good, then we're also going to include Banishing Light. When Banishing Light ETBs, we're going to exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until this card leaves the battlefield. And more enchantment-like removal, we're going to play with Karmic Justice. This is an enchantment for 2 and a white. Whenever a spell or ability an opponent controls destroys a non-creature permanent we control, we may destroy target permanent that opponent controls. So this, outside of having Hexproof or Shroud, this may be one of the best deterrents to make sure our opponents do not target our enchantments for removal, because if they so do, we're going to destroy any one of their permanents. So as you can see, when I was talking about how we were trying to accentuate versatility in the removal spells, you'll notice there's no Swords to Plowshares. You'll notice there's no Path to Exile. There's no Anguished Unmaking. We're trying to make sure that we accentuate the spells that give any permanent or any non-land permanent the ability to be removed from the battlefield. All right, next up, we're going to move to our global removal spells, and of course, we're going to play with Day of Judgment. Destroy all creatures, 2 and 2 whites. Now, we do have some of our shrines that are creatures, so that's something that we're going to have to take into effect, because that's not going to save them. Just because they're enchantments does not save them, because they're also creatures. So Day of Judgment will wipe them out too, but sometimes we got to lose a couple of enchantments in order to reset the board. Or not, if we're talking about Extinguish All Hope. Sorcery speed, 4 and 2 black, destroy all non-enchantment creatures. Yes, there are a couple of creatures in the 99 that are not enchantment creatures, but the majority of our creatures are enchantment creatures. So this will affect our opponents so much more than it will affect us, and including it here as a mass removal spell is only going to help us strengthen our game plan and hopefully lead to imminent victory. Because if Extinguish All Hope isn't just about global board wipes that affect our opponents, then Ruinous Ultimatum most certainly is. 2 red, 3 white, 2 black, destroy all non-land permanents your opponents control. 2 more mass removal spells yet, and they are going to be the 2 best ones we talk about. They're a little bit pricier, but their effects for the purposes of this deck are so much worth it. We're going to first talk about Obliterate. It cannot be countered at 6 and double red at sorcery speed. And it says destroy all artifacts, creatures, and lands. They can't be regenerated. But what's not being destroyed with this spell? Enchantments. Yes, we may lose some of our go-shintai shrines when we cast Obliterate, but every other shrine will remain. Obliterate, we could actually consider Obliterate to be a potential win condition. If you think about the fact that it gets rid of all artifacts, it removes the board of all creatures, which is fine for us because we're primarily trying to win the game through the activated abilities of through the triggered and activated abilities of our shrines. So if the creatures are gone and the artifacts are gone and all the lands are gone, our opponents will not be able to cast anything because their land base is gone. Our lands are gone, but we'll still have all of those non-creature shrines doing what they do. That is the reason why this removal spell is also included. For 8 and double red, it's Decree of Annihilation. Exile all artifacts, creatures, lands, graveyards, and hands from the game. But what doesn't it exile? Enchantments. We are an enchantments matter build. Our enchantments will remain safe and everything else is gone. As long as we have a sizable number or a couple of valuable shrines that are not creatures, casting Decree of Annihilation will end up winning the game for us. Additionally, if we have to cycle Decree of Annihilation for any reason for 5 and 2 red, well then we'll draw a card and we'll destroy all lands. Again, if there aren't creatures out on the battlefield and we have a few shrines doing shiny things, casting Decree of Annihilation or cycling it, we can consider that to be a removal win condition just like Obliterate. As our deck tech draws near to its conclusion, now we're going to talk about our mana rocks, our mana ramp, and the land base. We're going to start things off with a Soul Ring, best artifact in the format. Next up, Arcane Signet. Dare I say the 1B to Soul Ring's 1A, particularly when we're playing in a 5-color deck. For just the investment of 2 mana, that will tap to give us 1 mana of any color because Sisay's color identity is all 5 colors. And that's going to do it for the mana rocks in this deck. However, we do have some mana ramp that we want to talk about too. And we alluded to this creature earlier in this deck tech, and this is Sanctum Weaver, an enchantment creature that's 0/2 for 1 and a green mana. However, we can tap Sanctum Weaver to add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of enchantments we control. In an Enchantments Matter build, Sanctum Weaver could provide a ridiculous amount of Serra Sanctum-like mana. Next creature ramp we have is Feyburrow Elder. Now this is not an enchantment creature. It's one of the very few creatures in the build that are not enchantments. It has vigilance. Its mana value is 1 in Selesnya colors. It gets +1/+1 for each color among permanents we control. So its floor is a 2/2 with vigilance. And we can tap Feyburrow Elder, and for each color among permanents we control, we add 1 mana of that color. So by itself, Feyburrow Elder is a 2/2 with vigilance that can tap for a white and a green. However, in a 5-color deck, and the colors are pretty evenly dispersed amongst the 5 colors in the deck, it is very, very feasible that we can turn Feyburrow Elder sideways for 1 mana of every color, which, uncoincidentally, will be enough to pay Sisay's activated ability. Speaking of paying Sisay's activated ability, 1 copy of Giganta the Wellspring, 5/5 legendary elemental elk for 4 and 1 Gruul color. And we're not going to worry about the companion portion of this because Giganta is in the 99, but we can tap Giganta to add Wooburg to our mana pool, and this mana cannot be spent to pay generic mana costs. That's fine with us because as we slowly lower Giganta, we're going to turn Giganta sideways to activate Sisay's ability. Let's tap 1 permanent to activate Sisay's ability. Let's tap 1 permanent to activate Sisay's ability, and that's without tapping any of our lands. That's why Sisay is better as the general in an Enchantments Matter Shrine deck than go-shintai of Life's Origin. All right, so those are the mana rocks and the mana ramp. Now we're up to our land base. This is a true singleton deck, so we don't have any copies of any basic lands. We're going to start off with one of each, a plains, an island, a swamp, a mountain, and a forest. And of course, we always want to make sure we include minimally one of each of the basic lands so that we can reap the benefits of the potential Path to Exiles or Field of Ruins or anything that forces us, or not forces us, or anything that allows us to replace something with a basic land. Don't be the player at the EDH table who's sitting high and mighty on the pedestal of all non-basic land base, but then gets Path to Exile and has no land to put out onto the battlefield. You get something, you get one of your lands Assassin's Trophied, and you can't even get a basic to replace it. So make sure minimally in a 5-color deck you have at least one basic land of each type. So since we want to make sure that we can activate Sisay's ability all day, every day, we're going to do as much as possible to fix the mana. With that being said, we're going to play with the full playset of the triomes. All 5 of the triomes are in this deck, and that's going to help us to get one of any of the 3 colors. We only have to use one of the 3 colors on the land, and that's going to help us to smooth out our mana to activate Sisay's ability as quickly and as frequently as possible. Speaking of having additional options to pick when you're talking about tapping a land and getting mana from it, we're going to have all 10 shock lands. All right, so we've got them all here. 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. All 10 shock lands. They will come into play tapped unless we pay 2 life. The triomes will always come into play tapped. That's just how they work. But as you'll notice, the triomes have, each one of them have 3 land types as their subtypes, and each shock land has 2 as well, which means that they are very, very fetchable by one of any of the 10 fetch lands that we're going to include in this deck. And they're all here: 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. All 10 fetch lands included in this deck. Turn 1 fetch land should always lead to a triome. Turn 2 fetch lands should always lead to a triome. Those early play fetch lands where we have very little else to cast in our deck should always go to get the triomes from our library out into play as a way in which to start to establish how we're going to fix our mana. Then as the need to cast spells become more apparent, we use our fetch lands to get our shock lands into play, and we can just pay the 2 life and have them come into play untapped. And if our life starts to get a little bit in the danger zone, well, that's where the basic lands come into play as well, because we can fetch a basic land just like we can fetch a shock land or a triome. All right, that leaves us with 9 lands left in this Sisay deck. Best land in the format, 1 copy of Command Tower. It's going to tap for 1 mana of any color, and it is an absolute auto-include. Hopefully, this will be Command Tower number 2, Reflecting Pool. It'll tap to give us a mana to our mana pool of 1 type any land that we have can produce. So if we have a Command Tower in play and a Reflecting Pool, well, we have 2 Command Towers in play. We also are going to play with Exotic Orchard. We're playing 5 colors, and it's very unlikely that we'll sit down to a table full of colorless commander decks. If that were to happen, then Exotic Orchard would be almost useless. Why would it be almost useless? Well, because we are also going to play with a copy of the World Tree. This is going to enter the battlefield tapped. It's only going to tap for a green. However, as long as we have at least 6 or more lands, all of our lands are command towers. So even if we're sitting down at a commander game and we're playing against 3 colorless commander decks, with the World Tree in play, Exotic Orchard just becomes another command zone. Another command tower. And there is the ability to pay double Wooburg to tap and sacrifice the World Tree to search our library for any number of God cards and put them onto the battlefield. I believe there are 5 total gods in the deck. Whether it's worth doing that or not, it's just another option available to us in this Enchantments Matter deck. As we are in such need to produce WooBird mana, we want to make sure that we include some lands that help us to achieve that by themselves. And the first is going to be Crystal Quarry. It gives us a colorless mana, but we can pay 5 and we can tap this to produce WooBird mana. The numbers game fall a little bit out of our favor because we're investing 6 lands into generating 5 mana. However, the number of lands needed is not as necessary as the colors that we need. And if we're going to play with Crystal Quarry, then you know it's only a matter of time until we talk about Cascading Cataracts. This is indestructible. It taps for a colorless land, but we can pay... it taps for a colorless mana. All lands are colorless, my mistake. This taps for a colorless mana, and we can pay 5 and tap this and add 5 mana in any combination of colors to our mana pool. I bet you can't guess what the combination of colors we would add to our mana pool. If you guessed WooBird, you guessed right. As we have alluded to many times throughout this deck tech already, we are playing with 1 copy of Serra's Sanctum. We're going to tap it. We're going to add a white mana to our mana pool for each enchantment that we control. 2 cards left. Both of them generate nothing but colorless mana. However, their abilities were going to help us to synergize and optimize everything we're doing in this Enchantments Matter build. The first is Hall of Heliod's Generosity, a legendary land which can tutor right into play with Sisay's activated ability. As I said, it gives a colorless mana, but we can pay 1 and a white to put target enchantment card from our graveyard right on top of our library. So there's a little bit of additional enchantment recursion. And finally, card number 99 from the 99 is going to be 1 copy of Reliquary Tower. It's going to give us 1 colorless mana, but it's also going to give us no maximum hand size. We have so many ways to draw numerous cards in this deck, and we want to make sure that we don't have to discard any of them down to hand size by putting them into the graveyard. And there you have it, MTG BC, MTG Burgeoning Community. This is the Sisay Weatherlight Captain Enchantments Matter Shrine deck. Again, I maintain Sisay is the better general than go-shintai of Life's Origin for this type of build. I look forward to hearing your thoughts about that statement in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.